Yeah, so I'm sure we all have like different like preconceptions about like Ben Shapiro and Brandon Tatum, specifically with Ben Shapiro, at least for me. But before we even start the video, like, what do you guys think about the credibility of these two people on this subject of police brutality?
I certainly think Ben Shapiro has his biases in the Republican Party. I don't know much about the ex-officer or officer. I'm not sure. I don't know much about him, obviously.
I'm not even gonna lie. I used to watch Brandon Tatum like a lot and like really enjoy his content until I realized that both of them are complete reactionaries. Once I got it more like deeper and deeper into the actual data, I realized that these guys are pretty big bullshitters, to be honest. Which I hope to see that in the tapes, but we'll see. Yeah.
Yeah,
what about you guys?
I was similar with Ben Shapiro.
What about you guys? Do you have any like specific preconceptions about these guys?
I'd say I'd be kind of similar towards Brandon.
But yeah, I guess we'll jump into it then. We'll see what we think.
Ben Shapiro's a bullshitter, 100%. This police officer, ex-police officer, I don't know too much about.
Cool, let's get into it.
We're joined on the line by former police officer and founder of TatumReport.com, Brandon Tatum. Brandon served 6 years with the Tucson Police Department. During his tenure, Tatum became a SWAT operator, field training officer, general instructor, and public information officer. Brandon, thanks so much for joining the show. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Ben, for having me on.
So there's obviously a lot of talk about policing these days. So let's talk about some of the misconceptions about police. We've been hearing from Joe Biden and from many Democrats and many members of the media that the police departments across the country are systemically racist. They seem not to be able to actually explain what that term means specifically. What's your take on the allegation that police across the country are systemically racist?
Yeah, this is a complete lie. If you do any amount of research at all regarding the left side of the spectrum, political spectrum, you'll find ample evidence and clear definitions of systematic racism, such as in the courts.
Oh yeah, no, of course. I mean, court systems, obviously like longer sentencings, like super prevalent in there. Police interactions, how often they get pulled over, and it's actually funny. You'll see like all these like different studies showing that like black people get like pulled over like at such a higher rate, but that's only during the day. When it's at night, it's actually the same exact rate as like white or Hispanic individuals, which I think is really funny.
That is
which
funny.
Sounds a little racist, but like no, it's kind of funny that it does turn out that way. But yeah, no, if you do any kind of like basic Google search, you'd be able to understand that the systematic racism isn't necessarily like, okay, like you see like Steven Crowder, for example, where he'll say there's no systematic racism because there's no laws explicitly talking about discriminating against anybody, when obviously that's not really the case, especially when you're talking from like a leftist standpoint. When they're talking about how the laws are implemented, as we kind of stated before, that's kind of where we get the disparity there.
Yeah, it ain't about the specific wording. It's about intent and then subconscious biases. That's what it's really about. And I think we all have it a little bit, and that's the problem, is we don't know that we have it.
Yeah, exactly. It's implicit bias, of course.
Brainwash.
It's not like a diss on like the individual person, because obviously it's not intentional.
But for Ben Shapiro, like they don't know what it is, even though it's like no statistically proven. Like let's say, for instance, a white man goes to jail for the same crime as a black man. He goes to jail for 10 years, and the black person goes to jail for 20 years. You know, they did the same crime.
Yeah,
so they
with the
get
same
the same
exact
time.
crime, same everything, just different.
Yeah, the previous record.
Maybe there's a difference between like if he's been busted for it more than once, and that's why he's getting like a stricter sentence, whereas someone getting caught with it for the first time. But that's something different though. But if it's both their first time, they should get the same exact sentence.
And what I think people on the left do really bad is what they do is they try to make this a white versus black thing. All the studies I've seen that account for different races show that black people also discriminate against other black people. So it's definitely not a left versus right thing. I don't think that this whole thing of like we have like this country with like a bunch of like white supremacists is valid at all. I think it really comes down to more. We have implicit bias against black people. I think it's called white bias, if I'm not mistaken. I could be wrong on that, so don't quote me on that. But the implicit bias does exist naturally, and it's our job to acknowledge it, not pull this Ben Shapiro reactionary shit where we just completely ignore it. Because there's no way that Ben Shapiro is just not familiar with the data. I mean, he does this for a living. I mean, he's a Harvard Law graduate. I'm sure he's come across this data maybe once or twice, you know?
I bet he brings it up in the video that he's a Harvard Law graduate.
Yeah, I'd like to see him. Yeah, I bet he does. I would love to see him debate someone on the left, like a YouTuber, Destiny or a Bosch. That would be a very interesting watch right there.
He'll never do it though, and that's what I was going to kind of say before. Is like he has these takes, and he's like, "Oh, no one on the left can say that because he only debates college students." That's like the shit that like pisses me off about like Steven Crowder too. Like, you want to talk about like how you can debate, and it's like, dude, go do it then. Like, go on like a modern day debate or something.
I feel like for Steven Crowder, the reason why he goes down there is like, he's going down there to see what our generation is, because most of us are going out to vote. Polls. He wants to see what's in the young minds of our country.
But yeah, let's get back to the video then.
I think it's completely idiotic. I mean, the fact that they cannot point to a single incident that we all can work together to fix, they have to say it's systemic. They have to create this boogeyman. I mean, I was a police officer for 6.5 years. I worked on a police department that was primarily white and Hispanic. I never saw a racist police officer. Now, do they exist? Yeah, they probably do.
Okay, this is what I hate about conservatives, is you have to be like total, like, I hate black people for you to be considered racist. Like, you have to go to the full extent for you to be considered racist in their eyes. It's like you can't like
there's
do
a
like
lot to unpack here.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Yeah, continue though.
Yeah, like he said, there's not a single case. I mean, we'll get to his anecdotal evidence later, but there's not a single case, and I mean, we kind of touched on that to start the video, but I mean,
it's almost like if they're not wearing a T-shirt that says "I hate
law.
black people," that they're not racist. Like, they have to like advertise it.
And then he brought up his I worked on the police department and the SWAT
For
force, whatever he said, for 6.5 years, and he's never seen a racist person before, and that's not what systematic racism is about.
It's not even about, like, I wouldn't say not a person isn't systematically racist.
And I love how they kind of conflate this, because they say, "Oh, systematic racism." On one end, they'll be like, "There's no laws that are like against any denomination of people," but at the same time, they're like, "Oh, I've never met a racist person, so no systematic racism." Like, I don't understand. Like, I don't even think
Shapiro
they can define
said
systematic racism.
Yeah, Ben Shapiro saying the police officers are systematically racist, like that. Like, I'm not sure if like isn't it more like a system than it being a person being systematically
Right, it's the
racist?
system and how it's put into action. Yeah, of course.
But I have never seen it, and I have worked in communities of color. I've worked in white communities and as such. Most police officers are just worried about getting home, and they're worried about getting killed. And believe it or not, there's other people than black people who can kill police officers, and that's pretty much what most police officers focus on.
So, Brandon, some of the other things that people seem to believe about the police are completely fictitious, of course. They seem to think that police officers have magical abilities to subdue suspects without ever engaging in actual use of force. And so they have these very weird perceptions of what sorts of use of force are okay and what sorts of use of force are not. So, for example, you have Joe Biden claiming that the officers in Kenosha should be charged, presumably with excessive force or attempted murder. In the case of Jacob Blake, I've been talking on the show for a while about that particular case. They picked an extraordinarily poor example, considering there was an open warrant for sexual assault and domestic abuse, that they were called to the scene because he had allegedly just digitally raped a woman with her kid in the road.
I'm actually kind of curious what you guys think about this Jacob Blake case.
Personally, I think the shooting was justified. I'm not the biggest fan of 7 shots in the back, but I mean, from the data that we have, I mean,
I think one thing you have to like initially acknowledge is that the police officers in that did an absolutely terrible job. There's no way he should have even been in position to get into the car. Yeah. From the moment where they were wrestling on the ground. Exactly. From the moment they were wrestling on the ground until he walked all the way around this big ass SUV, or wasn't it an SUV? I think it was. I could be wrong.
It's like a minivan.
Whatever the fuck it was. Yeah, exactly. This big ass car, and get to the driver's side, they did nothing to stop him. Oh, no, and then when he gets in the car, then they want to shoot him. That's where I have the problem. I'm not necessarily saying that, obviously, these specific officers did that intentionally. All I'm saying is that they didn't do their due diligence beforehand to prevent something like this happening, which is their job.
He's putting on his shirt like a little kid, like mommy, where are you going, and that type of thing. Like he was,
exactly.
He wasn't trying to stop him or anything, and he had his gun out already, which, like, in my opinion, like, I shoot guns. Like, to me, like, he has bad barrel. He's like flagging everybody in front of him, behind him, because he's waving the gun around.
Like he's Yosemite Sam.
Yeah, like, no.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, I didn't love the video instantly. Obviously, I don't love the video, but like, I didn't love the kind of police interaction there at that point.
No.
But I think you have to say it is justifiable, considering the interaction they had before with him resisting arrest, with him wrestling with the officers. At that point, then you go and reach for something. I think it's pretty safe to say that there's always the thought of there possibly being lethal intent there. And I think that's that's pretty reasonable, to be honest.
I think the root of the problem really is in the police training. It's extremely lackluster.
They need more training. They have a high stress job. They need to be able to deal with those high stress situations, and not being like, going in a frenzy and like the first thing they want to do is pull for a gun because they think they're in trouble. Like, yes,
you guys think
like if you're in actual danger, then yes, if you need to draw that weapon, then draw that weapon. But if you're not in actual danger, per se, like, why is that your first instinct to draw that weapon? You should have more like control, I would say, to like, instead of like your first reaction, boom, pull out, like, there's plenty of videos around the internet of people being pulled over, and they're like, no, people are like not listening to them and all that, and the first thing they do is pull out a gun. I'm like, why would you need to pull out a gun? Like, he's not even doing anything.
Do you think it changes the situation at all that they try to tase him at first, and and even beforehand they were wrestling with him? Do you think it was the same situation? They just rolled up to the spot, they told him to freeze, and he ran into the car and did the same action, reaching for something. Do you think in that situation they'd be justified to shoot him?
I would say yes. I mean, you don't know what he's reaching for in that car. It could be a gun. It could be a goddamn RPG for all we know. Ready to call in his airstrike. I don't know. I personally,
he's got the VTOL jet.
If I put myself,
he goes 8 kills in.
If I put myself in the shoes of that police officer, if I'm the police officer, I'd rather be safe than sorry. Because I got people that are depending on me outside of work, let alone the people
right
around.
Next to you. Yeah, your partner.
So that's
sure,
where I stand right there.
They need more training, though, 100%. They only go to school for 8 months, and that's it. Do you think that's like I sell guns for a living? Like, I sell guns to some police officers, and they legit tell me, the only gun I know is the one I learned in the academy. Like, to me, I don't
think it's the time, because the Marine Corps only goes to boot camp for don't quote me on it, for 3 or 4 months. It's not as long.
I feel like it's even less about the firearms, and it's more about other what is it called? De-escalating tactics. Yeah, being comfortable with the firearm, sure, but de-escalating the situation before. For example, they should have been. There's no way he should have been able to even get close to the front seat of the car. Teaching them something like jujitsu, maybe minus the the chokeholds, because that's kind of debated right now.
They do boxing. They do boxing training.
Yeah, it didn't work out there.
Yeah, no.
I don't think that a McDonald's employee being paid minimum wage should have better de-escalation skills than a police officer.
Oh yeah, no, of course.
Yeah. Everyone wants to defund police. No, keep their funding. Just require them to go get more training. Hands-on training, learn how to de-escalate situations. You know what I mean?
Right, of course.
That he resisted arrest, that he walked around the front of the car, he reached into his car where a knife was found on the floorboards. That seems to me like almost the definition of a justified shoot.
Right. I mean, it's textbook. I mean, you can't get any justifiable than that. I mean, the guy. Okay, so there's a thing called a force continuum in policing, and that means that you use a reasonable amount of force, and it escalates depending on what the suspect does. I'm pretty sure when they first got there, it was verbal. Then it became physical, and then they used less lethal, which reportedly they used the taser twice, and it didn't work. He had one of the police officers in a headlock. After they've gone through the meticulous path of least resistance, and then they get to the point where he's now still an active threat. He goes in the vehicle. It's the potential that their lives are in danger and they can suffer serious bodily injury and or death, which is the definition of the availability for cops to use deadly force. They shot him 7 times. The last shot probably rendered him incapable of continuing to be a threat, and they stopped shooting him. If they had it in their mind and their heart to kill him, they just shot him in the head 2 or 3 times and he'd have been finished. He didn't even die.
I don't have too much to say on this. I don't have too much to say on this, but all I want to say is that's incredibly disingenuous.
Yes. He didn't even die.
Completely dishonest. Well, to conflate that he didn't even die, they didn't cap him in the back of the head, so it must not have been I'm not saying that in this specific situation. I'm just saying
trying to see
that standard is extremely scary.
Yeah, if it was a hate thing. The way he said,
because the man, he could have died from those shots.
Oh,
Like,
yeah.
you wouldn't use this in any other standard. Like, if you were attacked on the street, let's say, and some guy just beat your ass for no reason, you've never seen this guy before in your life, he just beats your ass, you wouldn't say, well, he didn't perform a finishing move on me after I was already down. No, you wouldn't say that. Like, this is ridiculous.
you with the
So
RKO.
just this logic is just so faulty.
With him being a cop, though, I'm pretty sure they're not taught to shoot in the head. They're taught to, like, shoot, like, body up. You know?
I don't know. I couldn't speak on that, to be honest. I have no
I would
idea.
imagine they're taught shoot to kill. But
Yeah, but, like,
I don't know if
no
that's
one,
the correct
nobody,
standard, but
nobody goes for a headshot, though, because you have more room to miss.
yeah, it's a hard shot to make in live time.
Exactly. So, like I said, I'm pretty sure they're taught to, shoot in the upper chest, where the vital parts are at, and not to aim for the head. Because, they're liable, too, if they shoot, a projection or anything like that,
Oh yeah.
Oh, what?
Like we saw in that Florida case, what was it, a
Like-
year ago now, where they like the cops horribly mishandled this one situation. It was like with a FedEx driver or something like that. Like several bystanders got shot and caught in a crossfire, and it was
Yeah, they're
horrible.
liable for that. They should get in trouble for that. Like, you have to be liable. Like, you can't just shoot shots and not hit
It's like
your
one of
target.
the first rules when, like, you get a
Like-
gun. It's like, obviously keep your finger off the trigger before you're ready to shoot. But one of them is make
Know
sure
what's
you know
downrange.
what's behind your target. Exactly.
Beyond the target.
That's just basic
yeah.
fundamentals.
They used the amount of force that was necessary to execute that arrest, and that's exactly what they did. These Democrats are lying. They're lazy in their understanding, and they're just trying to win an election. They do not care about policing, and they don't care about black folks.
We're speaking with Brandon Tatum, who served 6 years with the Tucson Police Department during his tenure. He was a SWAT office operator and a field training officer, general instructor.
Dude, how many times
Do
did
you
they
guys
say
act-
served? He said served that he's been on the police force like 10 different times in this video already. Swear to God, if I hear it one more time, I'm gonna freak out. We get it.
Wait, do you guys actually think that he believes the statement he just said, or do you think he's just grifting? Referring to Brandon Tatum.
I
I think he somewhat believes it, but I think he's really just saying that for the viewers, for the views.
Oh, for Ben Shapiro's support,
I mean,
I mean, I think you could definitely say something enough
standard
where
to
you
keep up.
can, to at least an extent, believe it.
Yeah.
But I don't think there's any way that at least he can, like, be honest with himself and be like, I'm being extremely hyperbolic right now.
Instructor. Brandon, so some of the other cases that have come up, it's amazing how fast the narrative pops up and then is completely unsupported by the facts. We've seen this case in Washington, D.C., in which an 18-year-old was shot by the cops, and the suggestion was that he was shot in the back. He was not, in fact, shot in the back, that he was unarmed. He was not, in fact, unarmed. The video shows that he was running at the cops with a gun, and then he was shot. It spurred protests. Anyway, this is treated as though it is, kind of holy writ, the original account. You see the same thing happening in Rochester with this horrible case of a man who apparently died from excited delirium. Can you talk a little bit about excited delirium state? Because this has come up in a couple of different cases. It came up in the George Floyd case. It has now come up in this case of a man named Daniel Prude in Rochester, in which it appears that somebody is extremely high on a very dangerous drug, and they've entered an actual medical state called excited delirium. Then they die of excited delirium, and the cops end up being blamed for asphyxia when it doesn't appear that that's actually what happened.
Right. I mean, the term excited delirium is a more modern term. I say in the 2000s is when I learned excited delirium. But they teach police officers out around the country what it is. But because before they would have these situations where people were high on drugs, they had superhuman strength, and then they begin to crash. It's kind of almost like a sugar crash. But when you start crashing from excited delirium, you crash and then go into cardiac arrest and you die. So many officers would subdue these people who were extremely strong, and they would keep using force on them all the way until they died. And then they realized that there was a phenomenon called excited delirium. So when you're using uppers and you're high on PCP or drugs like that, methamphetamine, you can get really, really intensely strong and your body can't handle it.
Yeah, no, what I have an issue with, when it comes to this,
Just assuming
I've seen
that
so
someone
many
on
conservatives
drugs-
do this, specifically Ben Shapiro, and it pisses me the fuck off, where they'll be like, oh, there were other factors. He didn't die of
He was no
asphyxiation. Yeah, he was no angel. He didn't die
As
of
the Democrats would
asphyxiation.
like to say.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
like,
it was.
they-
He died of an overdose. When clearly autopsy shows that there was a multitude of factors that went into that. One being the knee on his fucking neck for 10 minutes. That would be like the equivalent of, let's say I'm running in the street and I shoot a guy, and the guy
2 minutes
bleeds to
and 4
death
seconds.
because he's on blood thinners. Would I say, oh, well, I mean, he clearly died to the blood thinners. Like, me shooting him was just like, it didn't matter. It was the blood thinners that killed him, obviously. Like, no, you wouldn't use this logic anywhere. I don't understand, like, why, like, the conservatives jump on this.
They did the same thing when the CDC very recently dropped the numbers to the actual COVID death rate of being 6%, which is still incredibly high. But that's the COVID death rate without any extra factors in it. It's the same exact thing. It's the same exact thing.
Yeah, so 6% of COVID deaths were just COVID, where there was no other cause besides COVID. And 94% had like pre-existing condition. However, the majority of Americans, I think it's like 80% of Americans, have some kind of pre-existing condition already. And obviously, the older populations have that even more so, which are the ones that are already more prone to be.
They're at risk.
Exactly, at risk for COVID. It's just really basic stuff that I know that someone like Ben Shapiro should be well versed in. However, he doesn't want to be, either because he's a grifter or any other kind of external motives that he has.
And so what police officers should do in a case like that, if they can identify excited delirium is going to occur, they're supposed to kind of back off a little bit, turn the person on their side and try to, give them some breathing room because they're getting ready to go into cardiac arrest. So it's something that has been implemented and taught to police officers. And it's justification that police officers aren't going to be charged because this excited delirium phenomenon is happening because of what the suspect has done, not necessarily specifically what the police officers are doing.
So, Brandon, obviously all this stuff gets wrapped up in the same narrative, and it is a point of extraordinary stupidity that when we hear the Say Their Name movement say things like, okay, well, Michael Brown, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, Trayvon Martin, these all belong in the same category. It's pretty obvious that they're attempting to push a narrative that they really don't care about the individual fact of any individual case. As a former police officer and somebody who performed training, are there reforms that are necessary in policing? And if so, what do they look like?
Yeah, there is reforms that I think are necessary, but none of these cases are examples of reform. I mean, you can't reform people resisting arrest and pulling guns on you and being violent actors. That's not a part of training. They don't train police officers to shoot people in the back. Those are examples of poor policing. But when you talk about the overall perspective of policing, I think that there's room for improvement. When I was a police officer, I happened to be on the SWAT team, so I had an adequate amount of training. But most police officers don't have enough firearm training. And when you're not trained proficiently in firearm and you're not confident with your firearm, you begin to make poor decisions and you begin to be what we call trigger happy because you're not confident, and also confident in self-defense. If you're confident in fighting, then you're not going to be so quick to pull a gun on somebody or use other measures of less lethal force. You can go hands-on. Those things are not any fault of police officers. It's a fault of our culture of not supporting the police officers enough.
I actually think that's incredibly fair. It's kind of what we were talking about before about them having more non-lethal options that they're very proficient in. Obviously, the taser didn't work, but it's not always going to work. And historically, it doesn't always work.
You'll kick someone in the neck.
Yeah, but having some kind of like hand-to-hand combat skills other than, I guess, like the simple hand-to-hand boxing, jiu-jitsu would definitely be one that would be extremely helpful for sure.
Yeah, one thing I didn't like is when Ben Shapiro asked him, like, if you believe there needs to be reforms, and he just said, yeah, sure, we need reforms, and he didn't expand on that.
Ben Shapiro doesn't want reforms.
Well, yeah, I would agree.
That is nothing for Ben Shapiro. But yet, at the same time, he wants to be like, yeah, Democrats don't care about black people.
Both Democrats and Republicans are just pushing this narrative they're told to push. Pisses me off.
Of course.
To give them the adequate training. I mean, you can only train so much in real life scenarios, because if you have a crazy person that's experiencing excited delirium, you can only play that role in a scenario so many times. In real life, it's very different. So I think it's room for improvement, but the only way we're going to improve is we have honest conversations. In none of these cases, Blake, you talk about Ahmaud Arbery, which wasn't a police situation, right, but you talk about Breonna Taylor and all this. If they could come up with real situations, we can actually talk. But these are fraudulent, fake, made-up scenarios that aren't even pointing us in the right direction.
Well, Brandon Tatum, former Tucson police officer. You can check him out at tatumreport.com. Brandon, really appreciate the time.
Thanks, Ben. Thanks for having me on.
Police.
I definitely have an issue with them talking about the Ahmaud Arbery case. in such a reductive manner for sure. I definitely think that they should be charged.
I like how he said that they're not pushing forward any examples when I feel like that we have plenty of.
Yeah, he
If we're
listed
talking
off
on
a whole
police
bunch.
brutality and systematic racism.
He listed a few. So,
Yeah, and I think the left does have some solutions that they want to at least explore. Obviously, we can go as far as saying defund the police, yada yada yada. But I think what's more realistic is them saying, let's take some of the police budget and put it into more like social workers, for example, to handle situations that might not be suitable for a 19-year-old with a gun.
well, what do you mean by 19-year-old with a gun? Out of curiosity.
You can join the police force.
I guess I'm being
18.
I'm
don't
being
let you
hyperbolic here. To
for
be
the
fair,
example.
I'm being
They don't let
extremely
you-
hyperbolic here. But I
they
mean
don't let
someone
you
that's not
be
qualified to handle a mental health situation to the extent a social worker would, is what I mean.
I was about to say they don't let police officers. If you're under 21, they don't let you.
Yeah,
carry a
that
gun.
was just
You have to be
ingenuous of me.
21.
Yeah. No, you're right. You're right.
But actually, for example, since we're talking about this, in San Antonio, they actually have a police like a unit. These people who deal with people who have like mental disabilities, and when people are calling police on them and stuff, they actually go out there and they deal with these guys in a certain type of way. They were taught how to deal with these type of people who have mental defects.
And I would definitely be for expanding that. Any final thoughts?
I'm tired of him bringing up police force.
Yeah.
I see both of them.
They should have just got his whole resume and just put it on the screen before. But
Yeah,
like,
they
how many
just- they
times
just
they
have it
said
on
he was a
repeat.
police officer? Exactly.
Like,
Just have it going like
Jesus.
down the sides of the screen. Just this like full on resume. And,
Was
like
a
recommendation
police officer.
letters, cover letters, the
Was
whole
a
9 yards, references. In case we didn't believe it based off of the 20 times Ben Shapiro said he was a police officer, and just in case.
like if you ever watched like any of those like cop shows, like they have people like negotiators and stuff. Maybe like they should invest in like more like more negotiating and talking people down before like the situation escalates into certain things.
Oh, sure. Yeah, there's a multitude of different ways that we can specialize specific officers to do one task or another. I just don't really see that being super pertinent within the police officer field. I see most of the time if there's a disturbance, you send over just an average police officer. Granted, not a 19-year-old, sure, but you send over an average police officer that isn't really qualified to do the job to the fullest extent
his
that we
21st
would hope that
birthday.
he would.
The
Exactly, on his 21st birthday.
The 19-year-old
Half drunk.
would be at the prison.
Well, of course, he turned 21, dog. Come on.